Hello, everyone. My name is Ashwin Naveen, co-founder and CEO of Samba TV. Excited to be involved with this event today. Our company has TV technology. We invented TV technology that produces a massive amount of data in viewership of television, across streaming, broadcast, whether it's the content, the advertising, as well as even the video gaming that we consume in living rooms across 46 million households globally.
Nice, nice. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brett Dismuke, General Manager of WeTV and All Black, two of the networks that fall under the AMC Networks umbrella.
Yeah, there you go. Hi, I'm Dan Limerick, COO and Head of Business Affairs for the Client Rep Group at William Morris Endeavor Talent Agency. Really excited about this conversation we're about to have and really pushing into the future.
Hi, everybody. Jeff Schultz. I'm the chief, it's a lot of words, but it's two separate jobs. I'm Chief Strategy Officer and Chief Business Development Officer for streaming at Paramount Global, so responsible for the partnerships and growth for Paramount Plus and Pluto TV.
I'm Juan Ponce, and I'm a General Manager of Telemundo Streaming Studios, and we produce content for U.S. Hispanics and all of Latin America and Spain, part of NBC Universal.
Great, thank you, Juan. I think I probably want to start with probably the talent aspects of it. Dan, can you give us a little sort of background on how the boom in streaming has affected you all on the talent side of things? I know that there's a different structure for deal making and that sort of stuff, but also in the quantity of, like, in the case of series, the quantity of episodes that people sign up for. So.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting time, like over the last few years, obviously with Netflix into many streaming services now. It's been a real boom in content, right? There's far more shows now. There are far more episodes of television being produced. Our talent is working. There was a really big boom in the overall deal market in television in particular. That was really a race for talent. And I think each of the streamers are looking to get exclusivity over top talent, be it largely writers, showrunners, but really across the board. So we saw a real rise in those kinds of deals. But one of the challenges is in the streaming space, it's been fewer episodes, much more money, much bigger budgets, took way longer to make. So kind of an issue there with writers on staff in terms of how much they're getting paid over that period of time. And also, what is a hit, right? A hit used to be 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. Now, 3 years maybe is a hit. A first-year show could be a hit. So there's a changing landscape, but the quality of TV has gone up a lot. And I think, the challenge is as the kind of macroeconomic environment changes and there's more consolidation, that puts some downward pressure on some of these deals. So that's a challenge that we're having now.
Now, I know that part of that is sort of a front. We had written at TheWrap about there have been some considerations about the front end versus the back end sort of deal making and profit sharing. Is that changing now that, like, people are speaking up about it? I mean, I think Steve Levitan, who was here earlier, has been very vocal about some of that stuff because they do have a longer tail than other shows that have passed.
Yeah, you're putting your finger on one of the biggest issues, one of the ones that we're spending the most time on. So I think if you think about the way back-end models were created, they were really meant to kind of maximize the value of a particular project. So you'd window it through cable, home video, and then you just keep trying to find more value for it down the chain. Obviously, when Netflix came on, they sold them back. The difference now where most of the companies are either selling initially and in the secondary markets to their own captive platform, what's the value proposition there? So the initial kind of stopgap has been to kind of create this like per point model where you get paid a certain amount every time there's a season gets ordered. That's a kind of a stopgap just to keep it going. I think the challenge for all of us is how do you create models that are really built for where we are, where it's about subscriber growth and it's about kind of other partnerships and the value that comes from there. And now it's with a shift towards the ad model that some are making. How does that value make its way to talent? So that's the challenge that we have, and I'd like to I think what we talk about at WME is how do we kind of reopen this whole conversation and build mechanisms that are built for where we are today as opposed to where we came from.
Right. Jeff, could you give us a sort of the aspects from your point of view on,
Yeah.
on that deal making and how we're looking at it going forward?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the everything that Dan said, of course, is true, and there's we are in the midst of a transformation which for many is uncomfortable from business models that used to be far more attractive and more familiar to business models that are new. But the flip side, of course, is that streaming is the source of growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
That without growth in these new platforms, then the business model wouldn't matter. And so what streaming has meant to Paramount Global is explosive growth. Paramount Plus didn't exist about a year and a half ago. Now 43 million subscribers around the globe. Paramount Plus was the most popular service, the fastest growing service every month this year, with the exception of 1 month when Peacock had both the Olympics and the Super Bowl. And then Pluto TV was a tiny company not long ago, 12 million monthly active users 3 years ago, now over 70. Last year it was $1 billion business. This year it'll be bigger than that. And so what's interesting about that is so great that streaming is helping Paramount Global grow. But what's interesting is that Paramount Global is helping streaming grow. What I mean by that is many regard the legacy business that Paramount Global has as a hindrance, as a drag on the business, but it's an unfair competitive advantage. The content, the characters, the brands, the franchises, I mean real franchises like SpongeBob and the Yellowstone universe, right? Top Gun on everybody's minds, things that you can't sort of will into existence. They're things that you either have or you don't. And this depth and breadth and quality of content, brands and characters and content that really matters to people has put us in a position to just dramatically accelerate the growth of Paramount Plus and Pluto TV. And so the two sort of reinforce. Right, and so it's definitely a blessing for Paramount Global, and Paramount Global a blessing for us.
It is.
Right.
It's a fascinating thing that, because it wasn't obvious 10 years ago that owning the IP provided you a right to win in streaming. But we definitely see, in the case of Paramount, tremendous success. Certainly, have seen that, from HBO. We've certainly seen that from other studios. Disney Plus, for example, has been a runaway success. It's an amazing thing because there was a point in time when we thought owning pipes in the ground was your right to win in distribution, or that owning infrastructure for streaming was a right to win. You'd had to put everything through Netflix. But with the massive growth that we've seen from the studios that have stood up their own direct-to-consumer efforts, it's really an amazing thing for the creatives, for the agencies, for the talent, to have so many distribution options and real competition there. And for consumers that have so many choices. What's interesting now as we enter the second phase, though, is that how many subscriptions can people actually endure? Like how many can we actually put onto the credit card without starting to create some fatigue in subscriptions? And so I think as we enter the second inning, it would be a real fascinating thing. I think we shared some insight earlier that we're starting to see the beginning of a new thing called subscription cycling, where people are basically saying, I know there's a great show on one service, but after I've watched that, maybe I want to churn and go to a different service. There's going to be a very, very fierce competition in the second inning of streaming.
Totally. And just a quick observation based on that the first observation is money is not enough, right? I think that's another way of saying the point that you were making regarding the value of having the content, of owning the IP. Money can't create a franchise. Franchise isn't a decision; it's an asset. And then this idea that content may not be enough, meaning the volume of content, the thousands of hours or tens of thousands of hours might not be enough. And what's more important is having something that matters for a set of consumers, for a cohort of consumers every month out of the year, and now you have a non-churnable service.
That's right. We only have 24 hours in a day. We've got 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours of work. Hopefully in that remaining 8 hours, we're taking care of ourselves, our families, and whatnot. And so the real scarcity at this point is how do you fight for that remaining few hours of the day that the consumers have for streaming.
Well, and as we're looking at sort of that content question, we're also seeing that a lot of people, Netflix, a lot of are building into Spanish language, local television broadcasts, specificity on another level that's hitting a different fragment of the audience that probably they didn't have before. But then we have Juan, we have like All Black, we have like, can you tell me a little bit about what it's like in the competition space when some of these bigger streamers are starting to move into these Spanish language programming or more specified, audiences that perhaps your, platforms are based on?
Yeah, from a studio's perspective, I think Dan really neatly described the evolution, or like the horizon that we have lived. And from a studio's perspective, we were challenged to even attract the talent. There was, at least in the Hispanic market, the addressable talent is not as significant as general market, and so to compete and to attract that talent was a challenge. Now that we're seeing a more normalized level. The streamers are obviously very engaged in the space, but getting the right stories and not just volume in itself has now become, at least in the last couple of months, as risk aversion. You have downward pressure on one side on the volume, but more focus on the right stories. And I think to your point, money is not the only issue. I think the opportunity cost for the talent is huge, and eyeballs are important to the talent now. It's not only the money too. So like as they think of brand equity themselves, two is the right stories. And now I think, at least for the Hispanic market, just a story is not enough. I think their talent is a lot more particular about the stories that they will engage, because now they're not just seen in Latin America or U.S. Hispanics. The audiences, that at least the Hispanic content is traveling around the world, and as audiences get more sophisticated, they want to be in products that represent them. So we're seeing, again, normalization in terms of, or a little contraction in the Hispanic content over the last 6 months, just as obviously the macroeconomic factors weigh in. But we're seeing a lot more choosing from not only the actors, showrunners, head writers, et cetera, on the projects that they undertake. So, we're encouraged about this from a studio's perspective, that the stories matter again.
Right, absolutely. Are you seeing that too, Brett?
Yeah, and I think, on the All Black side, we are dedicated to content specifically for the African American community, right? And, when you have a mainstream or more a larger streaming service, they're just scratching the surface of the content that pertains to these particular genres, right? So, I think it's important for us to show that Black America in particular is not a monolith, right? And so, the diversity just within, our community is enormous, right? And we don't get the opportunity on larger platforms to really dig that deep. And, and I think that is the benefit of having, services like All Black. And now we're seeing a lot more in the marketplace, right? And so what is happening is no different from when cable television expanded into genre networks, right? The same thing is happening in the streaming space.
I love that you brought up cable television, because I have this theory that streaming is starting to look a lot more like cable television business model. We have bundling, we have advertising. What else do we have? And now we're having churn. That's being driven.
Well, I think that from a diversity standpoint, it's a phenomenal thing when you're not limited by a certain number of channels. Like to have all Black programming on one channel for Black people and one channel for Chinese and Indian, whatever, means that we are homogenized into one group. With streaming, there's unlimited shelf space, incredible production budgets, and now we can start to build segments within these groups that were traditionally thought of as one thing. And so it's a wonderful thing that Americans, by our research with Harris, 52% of Americans say they don't subscribe to cable anymore, which means that they've turned to the wide open universe of what we can bring through streaming, which does provide a much more diverse platform to reach these audiences.
And I think you make an excellent point about not being limited to the number of hours in a day and the amount of content that you can have. But if we're having an honest conversation, we cut a cord and we created a new cord. You know, that's where we are
Yes.
right now.
I think one of the interesting things is we've kind of all grew up on television and film, but in reality, there's a lot of different things competing for eyeballs at this point. Gaming, huge. Short form video, huge. So at this point, I think people are selecting how they're spending their time. They're not just going to 1 or 2 or 3 places. They're kind of curating their experience. So the more specific you can make it, people will put their bundle essentially together to match that. And I think right now we're kind of going through a shift. But I think you're going to see more and more of that. It's certainly for generations that are coming up. I'm kind of baked, but the generation that's coming up sees this whole landscape differently.
Now, I'll observe. I'll maybe come at it from the opposite angle. So I do realize why it's tempting to draw parallels with the cable business. It's top of mind for us because a few weeks ago we announced a deal to bundle Paramount Plus with Walmart Plus, and it received a ton of press, mostly incredibly favorable. But there was the occasional article which said something to the effect of "Here comes cable again." We need to revisit that premise because. As long as so everybody's better off in this new streaming future, period. As long as the elements of a bundle remain discreetly available and discreetly priced, then a bundle is a bargain between the provider and the consumer. The consumer is choosing to put these things together and thereby get more value for less money. And the provider's also doing it for a reason. Maybe it's attracting customers they wouldn't otherwise reach. Maybe it's turning those customers into higher value customers. Maybe it's because they're lower cost to acquire. So even though the concept of bundling, even the word bundling, evokes a cable business model, it's important to remember that all that streaming has done is introduce more choice and more control to consumers. And to the extent that we increasingly bundle, all that's going to do is bring more value to consumers at less cost. So that's why when I see one of those articles, I can't help but sort of I guess chuckle, because it's just a matter of time until everybody wakes up and realizes that it's not cable again. In fact, we're all better off for it.
Well, there goes my theory. Thanks a lot. I feel attacked.
It's a conversation. It's a conversation up here.
All right, cancel that story. I think we should probably talk a lot about the economics of what we're going into, the fears that we're going into of a recession and that sort of stuff. Because on the one side, we're being told that spending on streaming content is being limited or reduced. But on the other side, we're hearing that we need to add to the content. We need to have live events that keep people from churning. We need to increase our catalogs. Are you all balancing those sort of the economics that we're going into and the need to keep people's memberships or people continuing to keep your services?
The thing that maybe you can bring back your story on this, which is that, we're in the second inning here of streaming. We're introducing a hybrid business model for the first time. I think maybe Paramount gets credit for really doing this very well, but Netflix hit a wall on a pure subscription model. And the idea that we can introduce a hybrid of subscription and advertising is something that we are just now starting to figure out. And that's going to potentially bring a lot more people into the fold who are sitting on the sidelines who couldn't stick another subscription onto their credit card. The idea that you can have Netflix at a lower cost is a wonderful thing for the consumers. And that model is just at its very infancy. I think Disney Plus will be launching this quarter. Others will be kind of following suit. And that model is something that brings a lot more value to people than anything that they've had in the past, with more diversity in content.
Yeah, Paramount's strategy is very intentional to have the broadest scope of business models to maximize revenue opportunity, and to have a variety of price points, including free, to maximize the addressable audience. But I will say, Jethro, that does not sidestep the issue that you're pointing to, which is which is real cost discipline regarding how we grow streaming businesses, which was absent for years and is being reintroduced, whether you're a pure play streamer or a traditional media company. And that's actually the essence, I think, of streaming strategy right now, because there's a mantra that streaming is choosing what not to do, right? So when there was all the money and you just put everything in the bucket, that's the easy part. When there's finite resources and you have to make decisions about what to make and what not to make, that's where I think we're going to really see who brings the valuable assets to with them in the form of IP that they own and control, proprietary advantage essentially on content, and then who can make the right decisions. Because again, money isn't enough, and now it's in increasingly short supply.
Right. Well, I think that I was going to ask you, because I know that at WME, you can see the trends of spending because you're making the deals.
Correct.
And I know that a lot of the deals for 2022 were probably made already. But what are we seeing for 2023?
Yeah, I think at the highest end, it never changes, regardless of model. So I think that the deal making is getting a little more creative. And I think one of the things that we're just bullish about is, like, under all of these circumstances, talent is really what's driving this, talent and IP. And our talent is really well positioned, regardless of how the models shift. It really does bring it back to the question before, right? Because one of our issues is around transparency. Right? We don't really have a lot of insight. We have some. We don't have a lot of insight into the manner in which these projects and our talent are performing on services. And a lot of the choices we make with respect to our talent and where they go is based on how their projects are performing. It's an important piece. It's not just what's the deal. It's making sure they have the right reach, they're reaching the right audiences. So I think one of the things we really need to figure out is how to get more information on our side. Obviously, there's proxies and there's other services that can give you information, but I think we really have to get into that environment in order to kind of figure out what's the best use of where our talent goes and how it's performing on these services.
Mm-hmm.
If I can second that, the deals that we're seeing is, as before, it was a work for hire, more worldwide IP right offering from the streamers. Now it's more strategic and tactical co-production models, or even by region, selecting specific windows and not worldwide. So way more creative. I think in terms of the programming, Peacock and T+, we're trying to do exactly what you said, be more mindful and balance between having a library offering the original and the way we program and how we market. I think how we market is as important now too as the content itself. And then selected tempos throughout the year. In our case, we have the World Cup this year, and a few music tempos that combines the offering to try to maintain and reduce that churn.
One thing to add, like, one of the things I'd like to see as we kind of shift, because sometimes it's really challenging in these environments to make really large upfront payments. Some talent will require it. Others are willing to trade large upfront for equity and more in the back end and bet on themselves. Right now, some of the models are a little more rigid, so it doesn't really allow for that. But I think that's a way to kind of get different entrants and to make deals with different people that might not make a choice to go one place, that maybe they may make a bet on themselves if the upside is much bigger. One of the things I love about streaming is it has opened up a far more entrepreneurial approach. So we have clients who are basically their own studio and using these models, which really wasn't available in the same way. If you have a global streaming platform with cost plus deals, you can take a piece of talent, or one of our writers or showrunners, they could actually own the show and license it to the network if they have the wherewithal. It's a small group of people who have the wherewithal to do that, but I believe these platforms have really opened up a new world that allows for a far more entrepreneurial approach as well.
I will say, as we think about like the sort of second inning of streaming, something that we could say about the first inning is that there wasn't much transparency. There was a lot of opacity in how people were making decisions, and there was sort of an asymmetry of information that the dominant streaming providers would hold all their data very captive and deprive the marketplace of information they would need to make the right investments or the right deals. We're highly motivated at Samba to change that. In the second inning, we want to level the playing field with data. And the idea is that, that whether you're trying to produce or you're trying to, participate, or more importantly, if you're trying to market, to a very, limited pool of budget and time, that you can make the right investments in your programming and creativity with data at your side rather than trying to guess.
Yeah.
and that's a really big part of how we're trying to change this marketplace.
And I would just say, to keep it very simple, make more original content that people love that they can't get anywhere else. Like when you strip down, when you strip it down to the basics, the only reason I still have DirecTV is because of the sports package. Period.
For now.
Right? So, for now. So, you can, analyze a lot of the different ways to reduce the churn, but create more shows that they want to see that they can't get anywhere else. So,
I think that Ashwin, you might be biased on this, but you bring up a good point that one of the things Nielsen's come a long way too in measuring streaming. They're doing some deals that are giving them some extra information, but they did open the door for a while to other third-party metrics companies. How are you all looking at metrics outside of your own data that you have? I mean, where are your sources? What are you depending on to know that you're hitting the right people, and also you're communicating to potential advertisers who your membership or your streamers are? What do you all look to?
Well, there's sort of good news and bad news today, but Ashwin's already made the point that we're in early innings and this is improving. The data that's available is superior, right? This is census data, right? This is data on an individual basis regarding exactly how people are using the service, right? It's more granular, and thus the ability to communicate with users, to measure their interests. That all those things are superior, but at the same time they're totally fragmented, and they vary by device, they vary by service. And that's totally it's a real challenge. And so today, someone like Paramount does our best to piece together the first party and third party data that's available to us to create a map. And the map is incredibly effective, but it will get far more powerful as it becomes less fragmented. But when you compare it to essentially survey data, we're already in a better position. And we do it at Paramount have one unfair advantage because Pluto's it's massive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not just in terms of usage, in terms of revenue, but in terms of content. There's hundreds of thousands of hours of content in that service. And when you put a piece of content in Pluto, you get two things out. One is money, but the other is data. And we have learned so much from that machine about what content works for certain users. And believe me, that what the insights that we glean from Pluto feed not just into Paramount Plus, but throughout our content decisions at Paramount Global.
Gotcha.
I'll venture to guess that I think our organization works with each one of you guys at various points in your organization, how you're either consuming our data and insights on viewership, or how we're helping organize, data assets that you may have acquired elsewhere that your own. A case study of how, I will say this is a very messy universe right now. Everyone's doing their best. There's really smart people attacking the problem of how do you build a truthful, accurate view of what's going on in the world in video and streaming. I'll just tell you a little bit about what we did with Disney, who obviously has their first-party data, from the streaming platforms. But they also have massive reach from ESPN and from ABC and networks across the world. What they asked us to do is just help them organize their first-party data, ours, make a combined and complete view of the audience as they move between cable, over-the-air, streaming, digital, and have a complete view of the audience. And it was a way for them to organize that and now ultimately build entirely new products for advertisers, to feel comfortable sponsoring Disney across all these screens and platforms without feeling like they're reaching the same people 20 times and missing people altogether. Mm-hmm. But to have all that infrastructure organized in one place to produce a deduplicated view of the Disney audience was a really valuable thing that now Disney is able to go monetize, with its ad products across Disney ad sales.
Great. I think I have time for one or two questions from the audience. So why don't we see if anyone wants to ask anyone question? I can't really see. Raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, over on the left.
Go ahead.
Comes to streaming strategies, right? So you are focusing on the general metropolitan areas. What's happening with those outliers where people don't have access to the type of internet connection that you can successfully stream to them? Are you looking to spread across the U.S. or you're focusing on strategical metropolitan areas only? And in that sense, are you gonna is there an intention to work with the local communication environment to assist the transition away from cable environment to the streaming environment?
Well, Paramount is not a coastal company, coastal service. We have a very, very broadly appealing suite of content, and that's true for our cable and broadcast networks. It's true for Paramount Plus, and it's certainly true for Pluto. And so we take great pride in positioning our service for all of America, including all of rural America. I do think that it's probably true to say today that that last mile of reaching a consumer with a sufficiently fast broadband connection is something of a limiting factor. But I will say I don't think it's that meaningful of a limiting factor. We want everybody to have access to Paramount content, and we'll work to get there. But we are even today in a position, very much today in a position to generate huge audience across the middle of America, the flyover states.
Another question? Oh, let's try to appear in front. You, yeah.
So maybe this question is for Jeff. What do you think the future of the theatrical business is? Keeping in mind that you guys are playing on both sides of the fence. Is that a viable business? Is that eventually going to become streaming?
It's totally viable business. I mean, I have one example that comes to mind. So Top Gun Maverick obviously was a beautiful example of, that movie has been ready for years, and we waited for the right time to bring that to theaters because it belonged in theaters, and consumers validated that. It showed us that being in the theater was especially valuable, but it's almost an unfair example. What I would do is sort of rewind and to a decision we made, which is to have a consistent policy of a 45-day post-theatrical window that has certain exceptions where sometimes it makes sense for us to go day and date for a kid's movie, for example, family movie, for example, and sometimes it makes sense to go to streaming exclusive. But in the absence of those exceptions, we have a policy, and everybody wound up where we are, right? Project Popcorn was an awfully expensive experiment that I believe resulted in roughly a 45-day post-theatrical window. And what we've found, and I think now that the rest of the industry has found, is the sum total of a 45-day theatrical window is you create more value for both. So not only are you creating in-theater value in this abbreviated theatrical window, but being in theaters raises the profile for the movie, so it outperforms in streaming. So this idea that it was going to be a zero-sum trade-off between the theatrical business model and the streaming business model was always a false choice. And I think that we take a lot of pride in having sort of established that premise first, and then have years of experiments now in the field to validate that. So we're super bullish on the theatrical business, and we take great pride in the fact that we've helped validate that the two business models actually wind up supporting one another.
Yeah, and we also we still believe in the theatrical model, obviously, and I think the challenge we'll all have is as the theaters start opening up, and we've had a lot of great examples of people really coming out, is just making sure that they stay in the theaters when there really is a lot of exuberance around a project, that it stays in the theaters to kind of really allow that to breathe, because we do agree with you that having a theatrical model that then kind of shifts is far better for our projects in the long-term life cycle. possible, but making sure it gets its full run is kind of the push and the pull.
For sure, and just like there are exceptions that in our case would bring movies to streaming sooner. Top Gun Maverick is still in theaters, and we've indicated that later this year it'll finally make its way to Paramount Plus. But that's a movie where we have a general policy, and then we have
Yep.
we have sort of room to move for the right project.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Really good.